Hello everybody, I am Jackie and you are listening to Jackie Teaches English. This podcast has been created for all of you out there learning English and is designed to help intermediate speakers become more fluent. Each week, you will improve your listening skills, learn new vocabulary, and learn more about the English-speaking world. Want to read along with the audio? Go to www.jackieteachesenglish.com where you will find a transcript of this episode. Without further ado, let's dive in. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the second part of our deep dive into the renowned fantasy author J.R.R. Tolkien's biography. We left off last time with Tolkien returning to England from World War I after having contracted trench fever, which probably saved his life. Prior to leaving for the front, he had married his childhood sweetheart, Edith Bratt, and had graduated with honours in English language and literature from Oxford. We now continue our story with the young Tolkien recovering from his illness in England and coming to terms with the great loss of life caused by the war, having lost most of his dear friends during the conflict. Tolkien was declared medically unfit for general service and therefore spent the remainder of the war carrying out hospital and garrison duties. Tolkien recounts that it was during this time that he and Edith went walking in the woods one day, and she danced for him in a clearing surrounded by white flowers. This event would inspire a later story he would write about the mortal man Beren and the beautiful elf princess Luthien, whose tragic romance features in his book The Silmarillion. In fact, he would later describe his wife in a letter to his son, saying that her hair was raven, her skin clear, her eyes brighter than you have seen them, and she could sing and dance. He may have never called her Luthien, but she certainly was the woman behind the elven princess, as we will later see. It was during this time that Edith gave birth to their first child, John Francis. The couple would go on to have 3 more children, Michael, Christopher, and a daughter, Priscilla. Tolkien was a devoted father and invented stories for his children, sending them illustrated cards from Father Christmas when they were young. In 1920, Tolkien left the army and took his first job at the Oxford English Dictionary. His task? To work on the history and etymology of words with Germanic origin, beginning with the letter W. Does it sound boring to you? It may have been dull even for the language-avid Tolkien, who apparently spent a long time on the word walrus, because later that year he left that job and began to work as a reader in English language at the University of Leeds. It was in the 1920s that Tolkien took on the ambitious project of translating Beowulf, an Old English epic poem, which is considered one of the most important works of Old English literature. Tolkien gave many lectures on the topic, and his research and teaching had long-lasting influence on future scholars. Indeed, Tolkien would later go on to say that Beowulf is among my most valued sources, and we can see its influence in his own works. 5 years later, in 1925, Tolkien returned to Oxford as a professor of Anglo-Saxon. While at Oxford, Tolkien wrote The Hobbit. Tolkien began the story in 1930 when he was marking school certificate papers. He was probably feeling quite bored by this point and came across a page that a student had left blank. Suddenly inspired, he wrote the phrase, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." This was the start of a tale he would spin for his own children before bedtime. He was eventually encouraged to publish it, and it had such an unexpected success that the publishers asked him for a sequel. So, Tolkien started to write The Lord of the Rings, which he would work on for the next 12 years of his life, while juggling his academic career and family life. He finally completed his project in 1948. Due to the daunting length of The Lord of the Rings and its darker and more serious themes compared with The Hobbit, Tolkien had difficulty in publishing it, but it was finally printed in 1954. It wasn't expected to be a bestseller and received mixed reception initially, even among his own group of writing friends who called themselves the Inklings. However, his close friend and fellow Inkling member C.S. Lewis, famous for writing The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, stated, "Here are beauties which pierce like swords or burn like cold iron. Here is a book which will break your heart." The book became incredibly popular in the United States in the 1960s, and it has remained so ever since, ranking as one of the most popular works of fiction of the 20th century, and has since been adapted in several movies, plays, video games, and TV shows. Tolkien himself said of The Lord of the Rings, "It is written in my lifeblood, such that it is, thick or thin, and I can no other." All of the public attention and fandom generated by The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings became a bit too much for the Tolkien family, and John Ronald and Edith moved to the quiet seaside town of Bournemouth, which was very popular with the British upper middle class. Here, Edith enjoyed her new life of polite society and hosting dinners and parties, but Tolkien always missed his life in the city. Edith died in 1971 at the age of 82. After her death, Tolkien wrote, "She was, and knew that she was, my Luthien," and this name was inscribed on her headstone. Tolkien returned to Oxford and received further honors in the later end of his life, including an honorary doctorate of letters from the university. He missed Edith terribly, but was reunited with her 21 months later when he passed away on the 2nd of September, 1973, at the age of 81. On his headstone is inscribed Beren, after the mortal man who fell in love with Luthien in the Silmarillion. As such, their great love story came to a close, but Tolkien left behind him a legacy that still burns strong today. And just what was this legacy? Although fantasy novels had been published before, The Lord of the Rings made this genre incredibly popular, and he is identified, and rightly so, as the father of modern fantasy literature. The scholar Tom Shippey refers to Tolkien as one of the greatest authors of the 20th century and one of the most influential writers of all time, stating, "I do not think any modern writer of epic fantasy has managed to escape the mark of Tolkien, no matter how hard many of them have tried." Tolkien certainly paved the way for new fantasy writers, including J.R.R. Martin, the author of Game of Thrones, as a recent example. In addition, the ever-popular role-playing game, Dungeons & Dragons, is largely inspired by Tolkien's world, including halflings, otherwise known as hobbits, elves, dwarves, and orcs. His influence extends to many role-playing fantasy video games, such as Warcraft and The Elder Scrolls, and there is no doubt that future generations of fantasy writers and game developers will take inspiration from his incredible world-building. There's no doubt about it, The Lord of the Rings is a national treasure. It was named Britain's best novel of all time in the BBC's The Big Read, ranked number 26 of the 100 greatest British novels in 2015, and was included in Le Monde's 100 Books of the Century. Now that you know the history behind this incredible storyteller, scholar, and linguist, I hope that you may be inspired to pick up a copy of The Hobbit and immerse yourself for the first time, or once again, in the magical world of Middle-earth. And that concludes this second part of our biography of J.R.R. Tolkien. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you found it useful. Remember that you can access the annotated transcript with key vocabulary and grammar notes on my website, JackieTeachesEnglish.com. And if you like what I do, please rate this podcast and subscribe, as this will help more English learners find me. Thank you so much, and see you next time. Bye!